Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the second session of the World Policy Forum hosted by the Muslim Public Affairs Council and the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy. I'm Radwan Masmoudi. I'm founder and president of the CSID, the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy, and also I serve as a senior advisor to MPAC. Our topic today is very timely and very urgent. Around the world, we are watching democratic norms erode, trust collapse, and polarization deepen. What was once unthinkable in established democracies is now happening in plain sight in many countries, including the United States. But democratic decline is not a necessity or a destiny. Recovery is possible, and it starts with clarity, courage, and public engagement. Today, we are joined by two of America's most thoughtful voices on democratic reform, Larry Diamond and Lee Drutman. Together, we will explore why democracies backslide, how they can recover, and what citizens, policymakers, and civil society can do to rebuild trust, inclusion, and resilience. Larry, before we begin, I want to offer our sincere condolences on the passing of your sister.
Thank
Please
you.
know that our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family during this difficult time. May her memory be a blessing for you and your family, and may God bless her soul and accept her in his paradise. Very quickly to introduce Larry Diamond, I think both speakers need no introduction, but Larry is one of the world's leading scholars of democracy. He is the William Clayton Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institute and Senior Fellow at Stanford's Freeman Spogli Institute. He has written or edited more than 40 books, including Ill Winds, and has advised governments, reformers, and civil society movements across the world. Lee Drutman is a senior fellow at New America and one of the most influential thinkers on political reforms in the United States. He is the author of Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop and a national leader in advocating for proportional representation, multi-member districts, and stronger democratic participation. So we will begin with Larry. Each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we will follow up with about 20 to 25 minutes of Q&A. The two main questions that I would like to start both speakers with are, what are the core drivers of democratic backsliding today, both globally and in the United States? Where do you see the deepest roots or causes of the problem? And the second question is, many democracies decline legally and slowly from within. What are the early warning signs that people often miss before decline happens? So Larry, we'll start with you. Welcome again, and please go ahead and start.
Okay. Thank you, Rodwan. I'm going to show some slides. Can you see these?
Yes.
Well, since you posed the questions, I'll begin by speaking to those. I mean, I've been arguing since about 20 years ago that the world has entered a period of democratic recession. It wasn't as apparent back then as it is widely now, but we've seen a typical pattern of democracies, even if they're not fully liberal, like Venezuela, Turkey, Hungary, India, and many others, sliding back either into a great zone between democracy and autocracy, or really just as in Turkey. And I would say Hungary, and even more brutally Venezuela, pretty blatantly authoritarian, although to some degree competitive regime. I think the causes are permissive causes, weak political institutions in general, rule of law, and structure of globalization that's generating growing inequality, status anxiety, and cultural threat, at least in the advanced industrial democracies in countries like Venezuela, a history of corruption and extreme inequality. Social media, I think, has been a leading factor here in promoting disinformation and polarization. It's the factor that's most common to every single instance of democratic decay. And then you get citizen alienation and distrust. And then you have the general global contextual factors of the decline of the West in power and confidence, and now more recently, with respect to Europe, but much more the United States, the decline in their commitment to democracy, particularly under Donald Trump again, the rise of global autocratic powers, China and Russia, and then it's gotten worse in the pandemic. Um, I think what we can do to counter these ill winds, that's mainly what I'd like to speak about,
Mhm.
is first of all, we need to counter authoritarian aggression. I can't emphasize enough how important I think the struggle in Ukraine is and how much it will generate precedents and psychological and geopolitical signals about which way the world is heading. So I think continuing to defend Ukraine and enable it not to have, oppressive terms of sovereignty diminution imposed upon it by Russia through the use of force um, is very important. And more generally, I think we need to deter Russian and Chinese aggression and sharp power around the world, both by imposing high costs on their violation of sovereignties, by supporting democracies technologically and otherwise, and waging a global information campaign against their assaults on democracy and democratic values. Unfortunately, with Donald Trump, he's been disassembling all of that. He's closed down the U.S. the U.S. Agency for International Development. He's closed down the Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, and so on, Alhura. And so we're losing our capacity to push back against these authoritarian narratives and to push back against China's dominance of foreign assistance and through transparent means help democratic civil societies, legislatures, and so on. And also in the way he's instructing our embassies and our ambassadors, it's all about practical relations. You saw how obscene that press conference was with Mohammed bin Salman and the state dinner, where questions couldn't even be raised about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and there was no concern at all about human rights standards and conditions in any of these Gulf countries. We we certainly have to put a priority on reviving the advanced liberal democracies, not just the United States, but democracy is under assault in, to one degree or another in most of Europe now, not just Central and Eastern Europe, but Western Europe as well, through relentless mobilization of populist anti-immigrant parties, uh, ugly, authoritarian, and polarizing narratives on social media, and just growing defections from democratic norms of tolerance, pluralism, and inclusion. So we need to do a lot to defend democratic norms and institutions, to call out defections from them. We have big agenda ahead, which I could talk about at greater length, to defend electoral security and integrity. And this is going to be very important in the United States as we move toward 2026 and 2028. We already had a dedicated assault on that by Donald Trump and the MAGA movement in um, in 2020, and I expect worse in 2026 and 2028. So ensuring that we've got accurate and fair and transparent voting procedures and machines, accurate observation of them, and that we take preemptive measures to avoid their generating narratives about election fraud. Just one practical thing we could do in California, Oregon, and some other states that have mail in voting de facto or de jure, we could really mobilize to encourage voters to send in their mail in ballots well ahead of election day, even if it's allowed to be postmarked on election day. So we can get these vote counts in early and we don't give Donald Trump and the MAGA movement time to generate narratives about theft of the vote after the polls have closed. We need to, I think, change our electoral rules away from first past the post to provide more options, more alternatives, more choice, and less polarization. My principal favorite reforms in that regard are to eliminate partisan primaries and have blanket primaries to choose, several candidates to contest in the general election, and then use ranked choice voting to choose among them. Essentially, the Alaska system, but proportional representation is another option that would have some advantages in terms of essentially, you know, de- defusing the value or dismantling the value of gerrymandering and ensuring, that parties like MAGA would be, cordoned off into narrower lanes. Lee, I'm sure, is going to speak more about that. I think we have work ahead to regulate, monitor, and reform social media. The social media moderation mechanisms of the companies have been almost completely disgracefully dismantled. And there's a revolution coming now. It's already upon us with AI and deep fakes and so on that I think is generating really formidable challenges in terms of, the difficulty of separating truth from reality when you see a video and you don't know what it is. And so we're going to need to really ramp up our ability to anticipate this and respond to this in real time, including with techniques of pre-bunking, essentially anticipating what's coming and prepare populations and social media communities for them so that when they see them, they'll know, okay, this is what disinformation looks like. And I will say in Taiwan, in advance of the January 2024 national elections, when they knew they were going to be hit by a tsunami of disinformation coming from China, they prepared very well for this. And they actually had some significant success that we can learn from. I think globally we need to do much more to combat corruption, kleptocracy, and money laundering. Um, and of course, this is getting worse now in an era of cryptocurrencies where you can't follow the trails of money, and with the obscene amounts of money that the Gulf countries are pouring into the Trump family's cryptocurrency companies and other business investments in the region. On politics, I think we need bridging rather than polarizing campaign strategies. I'll say just a bit more before closing about what works in this regard. And we've got to, have issue campaigns that are focused on people's real needs. Obviously, we need at some point to figure out how do we reconstruct the architecture of democracy assistance. At least, Rodwan, as you know, the National Endowment for Democracy, almost alone among our instruments, has still survived and is providing assistance to NGOs, independent media, think tanks, and so on. And we need to defend its funding in the United States Congress. I think there's a lot more we can do as NGOs and think tanks to wage the battle for promote democratic culture and ideas and to push back against authoritarian narratives. Finally, what I've learned about fighting authoritarian populism in Europe, in Turkey, in other places around the world, and certainly in the United States, is that you have to transcend, not reinforce the populist instinct to divide and wage a culture war. And this means creating a big tent of opposition, a very broad coalition that, if I can just put it crudely, reaches from a mayor, big city mayor like Mamdani in New York to purple state governor like Allison Spanberger in Virginia, and even to moderate Republicans like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. That's the way we're going to defeat this. We need to lead with bread and butter issues of people's needs on the economy, affordability, and so on. But at the same time, there's a lot we can do and must do to expose the corruption of the populist leader, in this case, Trump, and the fraud in his claim to represent the people. And this is his real Achilles heel. I think we're seeing it with the Epstein files, but it's also the reaction against the grotesque, craven cultivation of the money flows from the Gulf region. I've got some reform priorities here beyond ranked choice voting. These are some of them, but there isn't time to go through them all now. So we can do that later. And I'll stop my sharing and pass it over to Lee.
Okay, thank you, Larry. This was very insightful, as usual. Lee, please go ahead. I think you would like to focus more on the United States, but later on we'll have a discussion about both globally and within the US. Give us your perspective, please.
All right. So I will focus mostly on the U.S., although I think there are a number of challenges that democracies everywhere are
Yeah.
facing. Move back to those. But yeah, I mean, the U.S. obviously it's where we are, an incredibly important country, and it's also of the advanced democracies, it's the one that has a liberal authoritarian government right now. And so, I think the question is, one, how did we get that a liberal authoritarian government in the U.S.? And two, how can we, at some point, when it hopefully is out of power, how can we prevent that from happening again? So, the trajectory of the Republican Party in the U.S. over the last decade or so, it has really been terrifying, I think. This is a party that has embraced this authoritarian nihilism, and the moment that I think was not so much the first Trump election, although that was a real watershed. It was what happened after January 6th. And this was a moment in which the Republican Party could have said, you know what, that enough is enough. we are done with this. And in fact, that was the instinct of a lot of Republicans initially, and then they backed away from that. And I think there were a lot of folks in who said, well, Trump will lose in 2020, and then the Republican Party will go back to normal. And I was skeptical of that at the time, but I think it was certainly a reasonable hypothesis. After January 6th, there was an opportunity for the Republican Party to say enough is enough. And instead, Trump doubled down, and the Republican Party said, you know what? However, whatever happened, Democrats are worse, and we're not going to let them have this impeachment, and we're going to defend Trump. And that created an even deeper divide in our political system. Now, Trump has some superpowers, and one of them is that he is an incredible conflict entrepreneur. And this is a pattern among authoritarians everywhere, that they are conflict entrepreneurs. They are polarizers. They are always trying to draw lines that create a division between us and them, because in that division, they can say there are the true Americans, and then there are the traitors, and either you're on our side, or you're with the traitors. You're with the people who hate the country. And the dynamic of our political system, over the last decade plus, has been what I've described as a two-party doom loop, which is the escalating partisan warfare. And I think there are important asymmetries here. I think the Republican Party has clearly moved much further to an extreme position, but the point of this is it's constantly an escalation. It's a tit for tat. I think the Justice Department under Biden was right to go after Trump on for his role in January 6th, but from the perspective of Trump and his allies, well, that is an abuse of power, and now we have to fight back, right? And the gerrymandering situation is another good example of this. Democrats in California said, well, if Republicans are going to gerrymander Texas, we're going to toss out our state-of-the-art citizen independent redistricting commission and go back to partisan gerrymandering. Now, I'm not a California resident. If I were, I would have voted for that, but I wouldn't have supported it, in a sense that, I don't think that's the right thing to do, but I think it is the necessary thing to do. Because where does this lead, right? I mean, it's just escalation, and fundamentally, the legitimacy of a democratic system depends on elections being seen as fair. Democracy is a system in which parties can lose elections, because that the next election will be another opportunity. And what has happened in the U.S. is it feels like if our party loses the election, then that's it. And I think there are particularly on the political right, although increasingly on the political left, there are folks who think that that's not, if our side loses, there must have been cheating. And I worry about intimidation at the ballot box in 2026. I worry about electoral related violence. I worry about the election security. I mean, we Larry talked about challenges of running a safe election. Election officials are constantly being threatened. They're being intimidated. They're being pushed out. That is no way to run a democracy. But the problem, and this is where we get into this binary two-party doom loop, is that there's a lot of folks who think that the stakes of this election are so high that winning is more important than forbearance. And I worry that there's enough folks who are willing to subvert the practice of legitimate, free and fair elections because they see this as so important, so existential. They've bought into a rhetoric of dehumanization of the other side is not the opposition, but they are the enemy. And that really, undermines democracy. And Trump, obviously been an entrepreneur in this respect, but he's been enabled by an entire political party that whose elected representatives and spokespeople and media figures have bought into the idea that whatever Trump does, it's justifiable because the Democrats are worse. And there are certainly have been elected officials who were not on board with that, but very few of them are still in elected office because in our two-party system, there's no home for them in the Republican Party, and they're not Democrats. And this is where I come to the conclusion that we need some serious electoral reform, and that it needs to be pretty transformative, as proportional representation would be, to really create a space for a center-right party that is not the extreme liberal Trump party. That there's no space for that in our current system of single winner elections, and I think we really need to change the way we do voting, because I think there is a pro-democracy, pro-rule of law, pro-decency majority, but it is currently it can't find its expression in the two-party system. As a more intermediate step, I think fusion voting, which has long been legal in New York, presents an opportunity for that, rule of law, non-MAGA Republican coalition to potentially fuse with the Democrats. I was just out last week in Wisconsin at a conference at the University of Wisconsin Law School, and there is a lawsuit in Wisconsin to re-legalize fusion voting. It's led by a group of folks called United Wisconsin, which is led by the former Republican Senate Majority Leader in Wisconsin, a guy named Dale Schultz, who's a reasonable Republican whose party has left him, and he says, "Where's my party?" A bunch of other folks, a lot of former liberal Republicans who feel abandoned by their party. They're not Democrats. They don't want to be Democrats, but they want to be able to cross-endorse moderate Democrats. There's a similar effort in Kansas and in New Jersey. I think this has some promise as a way to re-empower a small but pivotal group in the political center. But I think the long-term solution here has to be a system of proportional representation to bring back some of the multidimensionality, the broader coalition space, and it also puts an end to gerrymandering. Gerrymandering really is only possible with our system of single winner election. So if we used a system of proportional representation, ideally with open list, which is the most common form, although I think there's a lot to say for the system of mixed member proportional, the German system of having a compensatory list, increase the size of the House of Representatives. But the idea is we've got to get out of this zero-sum binary that is just trapping us into this us versus them psychology, in which there's so I mean, maybe this Epstein thing breaks the MAGA coalition, but I think there'll be a lot of pressure to say, well, Democrats are worse, stick together, and it's that logic that has put in power in this current liberal administration, which is just doing so much long-term damage to so many policy areas, from climate to just the administrative capacity of this country, to health, to the international stage that Larry talked about. But and I tend to focus on the electoral system, but I've been trying to widen my aperture lately and think about some other things, because although I think the electoral system is important, and I think that in thus far in I'll just say in European countries there are far right parties, but none of them has earned total power, or even there's few places where they've been in coalition governments, and they're limited because they have to build a coalition. There was just the election in the Netherlands, in which there was a move back to the center after so I'm not sure how the Germany AfD is still, there's still a pretty solid cordon sanitaire preventing them from having any governing power. So I think that has held up, but there are some real problems, and Larry talked about social media. I think that is a tremendous challenge, and I mean there's the disinformation and the fake news problem, but I think there's another problem that I've been thinking a bit about lately, and this is not just social media but digital media more broadly, which is the extent to which it breeds negativity and distemper. Because look, news is inherently going to be focused on the negative, because where the negative is more interesting, problems are more interesting. We are drawn towards negativity, but I do feel like there has been a period of collective distemper. Some of it is the backlash to the financial crisis. Some of it is the backlash to COVID, but I think some of it is just that in this, information overload, social media, digital media world, more than ever, it is the negative news that dominates our feeds, because there's just so much news, and now that every article is measured by its clicks and engagement, we know that negative, we know that catastrophizing, we know that threats uh, are much more engaging than positive news, right? And nobody writes about the plane that lands safely. And I think as we are in this age of global news and international news, there's a lot that has always been terrible going on in the world. I mean, in many ways, I mean, life expectancy has never been higher. There's a lot of positive trends uh, uh, for global humanity, but there are also a lot more threats. There's threat of climate. I mean, climate disaster. I mean, there are many human rights violations. There's many awful things that are happening, and it is easier to have a news diet and news feed that is dominated by those things. And also the fact that they are further away from us makes us feel especially powerless. It makes us feel like everything's going to, falling apart. The world is a terrible place. And sure, if that is your selective attention, it does make the world feel like a terrible place. And it's not to say that there are not some real problems. But there are also a lot of conflict entrepreneurs who are driving engagement by making people feel threatened, by making people feel scared, by telling people that their country is being taken from them by immigrants, or there's everything is broken, everything is corrupt. And the diffuse fears of climate change, of AI and other technological change that really challenges people's lives is very scary. So I think we're in a moment in which a lot of people feel very powerless and lack sense of agency, and are just overwhelmed by what feels like constant negativity. So I think that is a challenge throughout democracies. And one thing that I've been thinking a lot about in this area is, how do we get people to engage just at a more local community-based level, right? I mean, I think there's a sense, for a long time that we say, well, think globally, act locally, but maybe people should just also think locally where they can have a sense of agency, and especially as so much that, like, there's a lot that we can do to mitigate climate by encouraging people to do more stuff locally. I mean, whether that's local farming and or local craftsmanship rather than and also meaning. I mean, we're in this crisis. So many people are feeling isolated. So many people are feeling lonely, and that creates I think that also contributes to our collective democratic distemper. Is that when you're when you're isolated and don't feel that you're doing work that is meaning or purpose, that creates anger and rage, and there are a lot of entrepreneurial conflict seeking politicians who are seeing opportunity in stoking that, particularly among young men in the U.S. It's a real challenge. So I think, in addition, I mean, the electoral system is to me is very important, but I think that we also need to rethink a bit what we are doing for a crisis of purpose and meaning, and rather than feeding people on a diet of negative news that you have that is far away, and you have no power to stop. We need to think about how do we build some institutions and some community focused organizations that give people some sense of agency and connection that is closer to home, and also is channeled in ways that are productive for our environment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee and Larry. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. We're going to open it now for questions and answers to our esteemed audience. You can ask questions in three ways, either by typing your question in chat or by typing your question in Q&A. The difference being that Q&A, it will go directly to the speaker that you want to ask the question to. And chat, of course, will be seen by everybody. And the third type is you can just raise your hand and we will invite you to join us as a panelist, and you can ask by voice or by video. It's up to you, but you can also, by raising your hand, we will open the mic and let you speak and either make a comment or ask a question. But I'm going to start and saying, focusing really what I'm worried about is this issue that both of you touched upon, is the fake news, which is getting worse because of AI. I think very soon people will not be able to tell truth from fiction. You can see a video of anybody saying stupid things or complete lies, and they will seem believable because the video is realistic, the sound is realistic. It will be almost impossible for common people, common citizens to really discern and know what is true and what is just a lie. And I think there are many governments in the world that are funding these campaigns again to destroy democracy. I mean, of course, China and Russia, probably Iran, and many others. They can spend millions of dollars and create fake news all around the world to demonize or to discredit democracy. I've seen it with my own eyes in Tunisia. That we've had a big campaign against democracy, which has, in a way, discredited democracy in the eyes of a lot of people, saying that democracy doesn't put food on the table, for example. Democracy hasn't delivered, or democracy creates instability. Who's going to fight back? How do we stop this problem of fake news? How do we create a new narrative that convinces people that democracy is good for them in the long term, even in economic field, and even in, social justice and all that. Why do they need democracy? How can we convince them that democracy is in their best interest? And how do we stop this problem of fake news, and this threat, as I see it, to democracy from fake news? Larry?
Well, a couple thoughts. Number one, there are a growing number of companies that are developing technical means of distinguishing between created or altered videos and authentic ones. And I think we need to invest in those. There's often very sophisticated kind of trace elements of creation and artificiality that can be detected, and independent companies can register probability judgment about their authenticity. Audio fakes are actually more difficult to vet in that way. Secondly, as I said, we can pre-bunk the disinformation by averting audiences logically to what's likely to be coming, and to prepare them to question it. And we can train people. There are programs that are trying to train people in the schools now, but we can also train people at every level to get outside their cones of information and search around and investigate what they see to assess the authenticity of it. We need to get the social media companies to do more to vet in this regard, and take down violent, inflammatory, and obviously demonstrably false content. So those are some of my ideas.
And who's going to do that, Larry? The companies themselves, or you think we need
Well, the
regulation?
the moderation, really, we need to get the companies to do it. I am very nervous about getting government to do it, and I think we need strong civic and government pressure on the companies to start scaling back up in a thoughtful, democratic way, while respecting rights of freedom of expression, their investments in content moderation. But that's not likely to happen under this administration.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Lee?
So I mean, I have a little less pessimism about this than most people, in part because I think people are harder to persuade and fool than a lot of people seem to think. I mean, one thing I've been, struck by, in the US at least, is, I mean, eh, how the AI stuff has been used thus far, and it's been used in a way that's like more blatantly just like, Trump is Jesus, kind of like, this is clear AI. It reminds me of just like classic propaganda that has, been part of politics, as long as we've had printed material. Uh, just to say, there's always been a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of propaganda in Nazi Germany. It's been a lot of propaganda. So
But propaganda works, so sometimes it
I
does
think
convince
it works,
itself.
but it works. But it works when people are receptive to it, right? And so that is the challenge: is how do we build a political environment in which people are not receptive to demagogic propaganda? The So some of that is like, the basic critical thinking skills that we all constantly talk about. But I think some of it is also the building up of, you know like creating you talk about like how can we convince people that democracy is worse if democracy doesn't put food on the table? But I mean, those are the conditions in which people become susceptible to authoritarian demagoguery, is when people feel desperate. So some of this is just, the standard stuff that has always made democracy successful, which is like giving people a decent living and making them feel 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 like they have sense of self-esteem and a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning, and that the system is working. So, in some ways, propaganda can cut both ways. Uh, but people are receptive to demagoguery when they feel desperate and when they feel isolated and when they feel lonely. I mean, you read Hannah Arendt's Origin of Totalitarianism, and it's people are receptive to this in an environment of desperation and anomie, not when they have thick civic institutions and they feel connected and they feel like they have meaningful work and meaningful community. Uh, so the challenge is how do we build political, civic, economic institutions in which people feel like this is pretty good. I don't want to challenge it because this actually works pretty well, and uh, that is what has always made democracy work. And this moment that we're in which there is so much economic inequality, and so many people who feel like they are struggling to make a decent living, particularly in the U.S., while so few feel like they are just getting rich, and people see the level of corruption and money in politics. That is a recipe for alienation, and I think it's important that we take that seriously.
We have a question from Fleming El Amin. How do we better engage our youth, 18 to 25, to participate in politics and civic engagements? It seems like young people have turned away from politics, are not really interested in civic engagement. How do we prepare them with the critical thinking skills to become better informed citizens and to counter AI domination? Larry?
Well, I mean,
You work with young people all the time, so
yeah, that's partly the job of the educational milieus that they are in or pass through. And I really have to stress, Radwan, not only the elite universities, but all of the state colleges and universities and junior colleges and night colleges and every realm where young people gather. And that includes community organizations, religious organizations. We have to flood the zone of human and social connections with new forms of, resurrection of the Tocquevillian spirit of democracy for the modern era. I just spoke last night at a gathering of Indivisible. It's weighted toward older activists from, the civil rights, Vietnam era, and those kinds of protests. But there were young people too there. And the young people are gathering in new and older communities of engagement against the violation of rights of immigrants and other citizens, the affordability crisis. And so, wherever they are in social or work or religious or educational milieus, I think we need to reach them and engage them, and don't assume that they have fully absorbed all of the lessons and inspirational stories of our democratic history and our democratic struggle, and reacquaint them and with hope that with massive civic engagement, we can prevail. We can, first of all, prevail to put a limit to and ultimately end creeping authoritarianism in the United States. But with their active engagement, we can also have a better and more responsive democracy. So educate, socialize, communicate on social media, um, engage in the spaces where they're at. You have to meet them where they're at socially and informationally, and try to attract and inspire them with a positive vision.
Yeah. So plus one to everything Larry said. Yeah, but there is a real challenge in particular in the US that so many young Americans um, feel as though neither of the two parties represent them. They feel really alienated from both of the two major parties. And we also have an incredibly gerontocratic political leadership in this country. And it's just the most gerontocratic of any comparable democracy in the world. And I think you look at New York City, you have a 34-year-old mayor there who engaged a lot of very young voters who were excited for somebody new. I think there needs to be a generational shift in leadership in this country to engage younger people. I feel like there's a lot of young people who feel that climate is an incredibly important issue to them, and they don't see it being addressed. Issues of housing. I mean, that now we're talking more about affordability, but I think there are a lot of challenges that younger Americans are facing, and they just don't see those concerns represented in our politics. They don't want to be fighting the culture wars of the 60s that they feel like are still being fought in many ways. They want to move on from that, and they don't see their perspectives represented, and they don't see opportunities represented. Just looking at some polling in the U. I think saw some polling in the UK that like young people in the UK are like super turning to the Green Party, and I mean. I don't know how that's worked out for them in the first past the post system in the UK, but I do see that there are in countries with more parties, there are some parties that are much more engaged in mobilizing young voters. Whereas I think that neither of our two major parties are are particularly exciting to younger Americans who want something new and different.
Do you see any real possibility for a third party in America?
Not unless we change the electoral rules. Otherwise, it's just the classic wasted vote spoiler problem.
Right.
But the two parties don't want to change the rules because they're benefiting from,
Of course, they have a duopoly. That's the
yeah,
doom.
they have a hold on it.
Yes, but there are dissenting voices within those parties, and particularly as they try to manage fractious coalitions, there may be some folks who see some value in reforms.
Okay, we have a question from Jim Maddox. The rise of Trump is a manifestation of anti-Black feelings in the Republican Party, even though historically they have been more polite. Think of Nixon's Southern strategy. Reagan ketchup is a vegetable and welfare queens. George Bush, Willie Horton advertisement. Um, do you think that the Democrats have yet to admit that Harris lost because of her skin color? Do you think that racism is part of the problem in America or still part of the problem in America?
Why don't you start, Clint?
Um, I mean, there's no doubt that there is some uh there Obama's presidency provoked a backlash.
Mm.
There certainly some very ugly racism and anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim and just anti-immigrant sentiment that has emerged from corners of the Republican Party. And Trump was both the a manifestation as well as a tribune and a provocateur of that activity. Yeah, I mean, the Republican Party has a Nazi problem. I mean, it's like it is a real issue. It has a racism problem. Is that the entire Republican coalition? No, but uh, yeah, it's. I'm sure it contributed to Trump's success. Uh, is it the only thing that contributed to his success? No, but I think it definitely contributed to his rise in popularity. And again, he's done a lot just to stoke that. Uh, and it's discouraging and awful and hateful.
Larry, you have any comments about that? Is there a problem of
I
racism in?
largely agree with Lee. It played a role, but I don't think it was the decisive element. Um, I put a lot of the blame on Biden for waiting so long to get out of the race when it was obvious that he didn't have the capacity to run again and had promised not to run again and should not have run again. And I think that if he'd gotten out 9 months before and given Kamala Harris a chance to, win it in her own right, through a primary season and then prepare for the campaign and separate herself a bit and think through her agenda. Frankly, I think she could have won, or another Democratic could have won, and an African American like the governor of Maryland could win next time. So it's an element, but it's not an insurmountable element.
Mm. Question from Amin Jan about trust. Sometimes a lot of people have lost faith and have lost trust in democratic governments, like when the US supports democracy, but only when it suits its interests. It supports democracy when it's against its enemies, but it does not support democracy when it has to do with its allies, like Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Jordan. It gives democracy a bad name. There is lack of trust in the international community. How do we restore that trust? How do we, I guess the word is convince people that democracy um, is not just a tool for superpower dominance or Western dominance or something like that.
Well, I mean, we have to be fair and realistic. We've never been pro-democracy with respect to Saudi Arabia or UAE.
Yeah.
Strategic interests always enter in. And so we have to be honest about that. But even when we're not going to do what seems unlikely and, urge powerful Gulf or other Arab states to democratize tomorrow, we can still stand up for human rights, and we don't have to excuse or walk away from extreme violations of human rights or denials of U.S. intelligence documented findings of complicity of the Crown Prince in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, or look away from what the egregious crimes that the UAE is committing with its proxy forces in Sudan now. We can stand up against these things. And I think that, we have to have an honest recognition, Radwan, that democracy and human rights can't be uh, the only standard, the only goal in our foreign policy. We live in a complicated world We have other goals and strategic interests. We need Saudi and UAE cooperation to try and develop the leverage to get, reconstruction and aid and decent governance in Gaza, and ultimately find our way toward a Palestinian state that can be viable and live in peace with Israel. So we have other goals, but we can still be honest and consistent in our values. And if we aren't willing to talk about them, then we can't be consistent with them.
But Larry, that's been the policy for the last 40 years, and we haven't reached peace in the Middle East. We haven't, the Middle East is going, from bad to worse because of dictatorship. I believe that democracy is the key to peace, and that dictators, UAE and Saudi Arabia, but also other dictators, are not really interested in peace. They're interested in staying in power, and they're willing to do whatever suits
I,
Israel or the
I,
United States. They're
I
not
think
really
part of
willing
the
to.
opportunity here, Radwan, is that with the Crown Prince, I think he sees peace in the region and a pathway toward a Palestinian state as part of his staying in power. And you can
Mm,
debate the Saudi situation all you want. There's not going to be immediate democratization in Saudi Arabia.
mm,
We have to think seriously and rationally, if we're going to move things forward and not just with our dreams and aspirations. So,
mm.
in a place like Saudi Arabia, change will be more incremental in terms of what's actually achievable. But I think that is an excellent subject, but probably for a whole nother session.
Right. Lee, how can the United States regain its credibility? I mean, I think its credibility is pretty much shot or destroyed right now in terms of democracy. But can we regain that credibility?
Uh, I don't know. It'll take a while, I think. Um, you know, I, I honestly don't know. I think,
I
yeah,
guess we have to start by being a true good democracy, or
it won't happen under this administration.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
We'll we'll take an incredible commitment from from not just one but multiple
yeah.
administrations in the future. And I think we have just a number of prominent elected officials in the U.S. who basically think we should just screw the rest of the world, and let's get out of the business of promoting human rights abroad, and let's go it alone, Fortress America. And I mean, there's always been there's a long history of isolationism in the U.S. for sure, but I don't think it's been this prevalent for since the pre-World War II era.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a very, I think, invigorating and insightful discussion about democracy and how we can stop the backsliding and how we can reverse the backsliding. Thank you both, Larry and Lee, for your participation and for taking the time to speak with us, and also thanks to the audience for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at future meetings of the World Policy Forum, and we pray that democracy will succeed and will come back in the United States and around the world. I really see democracy as the only hope for peace, for stability, for development, and that hopefully all these troubles around the world will convince us even more that real democracy and real human rights and equality and justice are not just slogans. They are not just abstract values. They are really needed in the world today to establish peace and to establish stability and human dignity. So thank you, Larry. Thank you, Lee, and hope to see you again soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Good to
Thank
see
you.
you, Lee.
Good to see you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.